The date is June 22nd, 2022. Why am I recording this? I think that I see how I have been affected by other people and watching their progression. And I have recently come to understand the value of holding oneself accountable to your own actions and maybe even more importantly to your own thoughts, to your own aspirations. I think I'm going to call the channel Building Caleb Kalev, something like that. And the reason for it is because I think about the lyrics of the Nipsey Hussle song, I say self-made because I design myself. And I think that there's always this debate among people, do people have the capacity to change? Do people not have the capacity to change? I think that most people change. I think that saying that people never change is silly. I think that just most of the time that when people do change, it's not consciously, it's not with purpose. People evolve into other versions of their worst self. They already are their worst self, and then they evolve into different versions of their worst self. I look at older people and I think about the fact that I used to think of maturity or growth in this linear pattern as you age. And then I realized that oftentimes it just appears as growth and maturity. The reality is that these older people are just evolving into different versions of their same immature self, and that there wasn't ever really any progression. Or that rather, as people age, it's not always an improvement, it's just different. When I think of the Nipsey Hussle lyrics, I say self-made because I design myself. I have a vision of the man that I want to be. And I know that that man isn't just going to appear. That it won't happen by itself, it won't happen on its own. And that it'll only happen if I build myself into that man. And so this is just the documentation of building myself into the man that I want to be, the man that I envision myself to be. And this is a documentation of that journey. That's all it really is. One, to keep myself accountable to myself, and two, I see how I have benefited from watching others in their journey of progression and how much that has meant to me as a person. I think the documentation of my journey is primarily so that I can keep myself accountable to myself. However, I think if other people are able to benefit from it as well, I see that's an incredibly positive thing that I'm able to, the idea of like being given to from one area and then giving back to the universe in another area, I think it is very silly, but I think that would be gratifying for me if I have somewhere in my mind that there was a possibility that my journey in building myself into the man that I want to be encouraged or helped shape or inspire others on their journey into the people that they want to be. A little bit of insight into that. I think there are pluses and minuses to everything, right? And I think that we each have our own life experiences that have given us unfair advantages in one sector of life, and then there have been drawbacks in other sectors of life. I kind of adhere, whether it's necessarily true or not, just because I think it's a belief that is helpful, not because it's true, in the concept of 100% human suffering, believing that each human experiences 100% suffering in their life, and that someone who's dropped their phone, or how shall I explain? I believe that the chemical environment in the brain of a teenager who has just had their crush cheat on them in high school, living in a first world environment in the United States, has the same chemical level of pain in their brain as a child somewhere in the Middle East who has just watched their parents be murdered in front of them. And I believe that's because we each have a baseline set in our heads, and whatever peaks that baseline, like whatever the quote ceiling, chemical ceiling of suffering in our brain is different for each individual. And so, because our baselines are all different, there are different circumstances that brings us to that peak point of pain and suffering. I think it's harder to argue this, but in the same way that I think there's 100% suffering, I think there's also 100% gifting or 100% privilege, meaning that each individual has a given amount of gifting or privilege that has been given to them that is just expressed and quantified in different sectors of their life. And so there may be one individual who is incredibly wealthy and has a childhood that afforded them, every educational opportunity, but they didn't have the ability to correctly develop from a mental standpoint as a child because of the relational stresses between their parents and their home. And so that person had a gifting or privilege in one area, but there was a drawback in another area, and that's adhering to the concept of 100% gifting or 100% privilege. Like there's a quantifiable degree to which everyone is gifted and privileged, and it's just expressed differently in different quadrants and aspects of people's lives. Is that true? Probably not. Is it an idea that I think is helpful because it gets rid of self-pity? Yeah, I do think it's helpful. So I think in my own life, I've been incredibly privileged in being able to have an incredible amount of freedom with an incredibly loving and accepting family that I was told ever since I was, 3, that my parents had the complete belief that I could be a NASA astronaut or a brain surgeon or the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company or the president. But they would also be just as happy with me if I was a garbage man or a teacher. It's interesting how teacher and garbage man are seen on the same level in the United States, I think, because of how much money they make. Because status is associated with money in the United States as opposed to like a religious teacher in another country who doesn't make a lot of money. Their status may be higher. Status and money aren't inextricably linked, whereas in the United States they are. So I just think it's interesting how that came up in my brain, or how I thought that way without even second guessing it. Anyway, I was always told that I could do anything, and my parents always believed in me 100%. I believed that I had the gifting, intelligence, resourcefulness, whatever was necessary to achieve anything that I set my mind to. And I was always told that, and I believed that, but I was given the freedom to do whatever I want, and I had the knowledge that no matter what path I chose in life, that my parents would love and accept me. And I was always told that if I didn't, pursue a certain path or level of wealth or a certain career, my parents would still love me, and that didn't diminish my value as a human. So I think there was an incredible amount of peace growing up in my childhood. Well, peace in environment. I don't know about peace within myself, but I felt an incredible sense of freedom, and I felt an incredible sense of independence in thought, and I think that's a really beautiful and wonderful thing. I got to experience a lot of very unique life experiences growing up in different countries, traveling, growing up in the Middle East and the United States, and I see that as an incredible privilege, but I also do recognize the fact that benefit and privilege in one quadrant of that life, I also have other drawbacks and weakness in other quadrants of my life. Or, I don't know if quadrant, because quadrant, it has to be 4. So in other areas of my life. I think I had all of this freedom and independence of thought, and I think I developed an incredible disdain for order and structure and discipline. And I can see the ways that has negatively impacted me in my life. Not through any fault of my parents, just through my own choices and actions and the paths that I went down. I think that there has been benefits to those paths, and certainly I've got further ahead in certain areas and I've gotten to take certain shortcuts, but then that created debt and dues in other areas of my life where I didn't develop on a equal footing in those other areas. And I think as I look back on my life and my quotient of independent thought, reasoning, analysis, my assurance of my own creative vision, my value for my own thoughts, I think that I fundamentally lacked a lot of discipline. Discipline is a tool that takes what is in your mind and makes a reality. And I always saw that discipline was a tool used by others to impress their own reality on my life. And so I always saw it as a negative thing and rejected it, and never really saw discipline for what it was, and that it was only a tool, and that it was also the tool that I could use on myself to make the realities that I desired come to realization in my own life. And so I think because of my fear of not wanting to be controlled by other people, rejected discipline and order and structure in my life entirely, and in doing so, I hampered my own trajectory because I wasn't able to get myself to do what I wanted to do. I did not keep myself accountable to my own desires and to my own aspirations. You know, traditionally, if I graduated from high school at 16, and I think through the next couple of years after that, I had an incredible amount of growth in figuring out who I was as a person, but more importantly, who I wanted to be as a person. And I gained an incredible amount of independence in thought. But interestingly, there's this link between independence of thought and discipline. Without discipline, you're not useful to anyone. But if you have discipline and no independent thought, then you're only useful to other people. It's when you have discipline and independent thought that you can be useful to yourself. And I think that I had the independent thought, but I didn't have the discipline. And so I wasn't useful to anyone, including myself. And I developed that independence of thought kind of after I graduated. I took the GED, graduated 2 years early, because I wasn't applying myself in school. I didn't think it was a good idea for me to do the GED. I didn't know if I could do it. I think I thought I could do it. Maybe I was just lazy and I didn't want to have to take the test. My father encouraged me to do it. He said, listen, you're done with school. Clearly you're not applying yourself. I know that you can pass it. So I passed the GED. I got a high enough score. The math score wasn't incredible. It was probably 20% above whatever I need to pass. In social studies, I got in the 98.2 percentile of high school students who were graduating, which at the time I thought was kind of cool, or not that bad, but beating 98% of the population as I've gotten older and I see more people, and that's not something to be proud of or aspire to. 999 out of 1,000 people are not people that you would want to model your life after or who you would want to be like. So beating 98 out of 100 is not something that a person should really be proud of or aspire to. Not that it really matters. The GED doesn't have any dictation over where you'll go in life, really. Most of school, most of the testing doesn't, but nevertheless, I managed to get the equivalent of what would be honors in high school, and then I actually got a high enough score that I got college credits, which would have been equivalent to finishing my gen eds. It was like credits, it was like 12 college credits or whatever. I scored high enough on the GED that it passed me through those. And so at that time I was still thinking of being a linguist or becoming a doctor, but I was really wrestling with becoming a doctor because I believed that I was going to sacrifice the best years of my life, the years of my life where I had the most energy and vibrance and drive, and I was going to sacrifice them to looking at a textbook. And I had a really hard time rationalizing that. I think as I look back now, at the time it may have just been laziness. I don't know if it was as good as intentioned as I had believed it was, or that it was actually because I was not wanting to, quote, waste my life. Maybe it was just out of laziness, but the thing that I've come to learn since then is that if you tell yourself that you don't want to do something because of how long it's going to take, or you don't want to sacrifice that amount of time to accomplish or achieve that goal. The reality that I think many people forget is that time goes on regardless of whether you're attempting to achieve that goal or not. Nevertheless, I do think it was a good decision, and I don't think that school was something that was going to help me achieve what I now see as being what I want to invest the time span of my life into. But I had the opportunity of going down the road of going to college, even though now I look at it as like college is this very artificial environment where it's like you're getting to be a kid throughout your first 4 years of what is supposedly independence and responsibility and living on your own. It's branded that way. I don't know if it really is that way. Now as I look at people, and now as I'm 22 and would have been the age that I would have been when graduating, and I look around at other 20, 21, 22-year-olds, 24-year-olds, and think like, how independent or responsible or how figured out do they have it? It goes back to my point that no matter how old you are, I don't know if anyone really knows anything or anyone. Yeah, I had to grab some trash bags for someone, and I ended up switching the battery. I had the choice to go down the path of college. I think that would have been a way to create self-discipline. I didn't do that. I had the choice to go into the military. I think that would have created self-discipline. I did not do that. Instead, I ended up doing other things that I think I grew and learned many things that I would not have had I done either of those two things. But I think that there was a debt that was built up of not learning self-discipline. And so to be able to get to the next level, it's like you need both sides of the rung of each ladder. And if the left-hand side is all the way at rung 7, but the right-hand side is at rung 3, you're not going to be able to get to rung 4 until you have that extra rung on the right side in place. I think that's an analogy that I've heard from Alex Hormozi. So now is a stage in my life where I'm having to pay back that debt and build the right side of my ladder. And I don't know how I'm coming across in this. Maybe it's calm, maybe it's not. But coming to grips with that reality has been pretty difficult for me. Well, difficult. Whatever. Well, I don't think coming to grips with the reality is as hard as implementing the knowledge of the reality into the action of what you need to do. And building self-discipline is hard. I say hard as an objective fact of other people's perception. That's not how I speak to myself. I don't allow myself to, well, I try not to allow myself to tell myself that things are hard, because that's just not helpful. But I think many other people would describe it as being hard, and if I did not consciously try to reprogram myself and the way that I talk to myself, I think I could fall into the trap of saying that it's hard. Anyway, enough of that for now. I kind of want this to also show my life and whatnot. Here is laundry that I need to do. And then I'm going to need to set up breakfast in a bit here. That's talking about self-discipline. That's one struggle that I often have, is not getting the laundry done on time. So I get all my other responsibilities done when it's night shift, and then the laundry is often left to the last minute. And I'm still doing that when the next person comes in. And then technically most other people would just hand it off to the next shift. But I feel bad that I haven't gotten all of the responsibilities done that are technically my own. And so I have done poor time management so that I didn't get these responsibilities done. The next person comes in, I feel indebted, so I stay an hour or two off the clock depending on how much I have to do. And then that is an irresponsible use of time, because I'm not taking that time and investing into something that I believe is important or is going to actually create returns in my life, as opposed to this is just gonna, quote, create returns in the relationship with my coworkers. But even then, maybe not even really. I need to do these reservations, and then I need to do all the cleaning sheets, and then do the bookkeeping and whatnot. Then I also need to set up breakfast, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that. It's now 7:19. I've finished the reservations, I've finished the night audit and the bookkeeping type thing. I finished the reservations, I finished the night audit, and I've done some of the laundry. Got the rest of the laundry going here. And then have some rags to do still. And some guest laundry. Today is going to be a pretty big day because there's about 20 or 25 people checking in because of a festival that's going on. That was entirely pointless. Suppose I'll start again, but this time I can be more concise. I don't appreciate watching the police vehicles or, two of the sheriff's vehicles. It just makes me uncomfortable. I don't want to see them because every time I see them, I'm reminded by, like, if they don't like what I'm doing, they can come over and talk to me. I'm not entirely against the idea of law enforcement. I'm not entirely against the idea of police, because it would make certain aspects of life very inconvenient. I'm just against police and law enforcement for me, if that makes any sense. I don't have any desire to be under the scope of the law, any law enforcement, any jurisdiction, any rules. My kind of knee-jerk reaction against authority and rules and structure, I think that also manifests itself in the form of a knee-jerk reaction towards laws, law enforcement, police, enforcement of the laws that they say that you're supposed to abide by. And I don't have any desire to be underneath the law. So, that's what I was going to say. My knee-jerk reaction against law enforcement and rules and being put underneath other people's rules, I think is partially one of the motivating factors for what I want to pursue in life and how I define success and how that defines what I want to achieve. I have the desire to have enough money, have enough power, have enough influence that I can be above the scope of other people's laws. Obviously, there's always individuals who have influence over our lives, and I think there are certain groups that, after you have amassed a certain amount of power, would like to have input and dictate the realm in which you have power and control. And they want to make sure you're just not running amok willy-nilly with the influence that you have. But I think there's a sweet spot in there where you don't have enough power and control and influence to attract the attention of certain individuals. But also, you are above the law in the traditional sense, as long as you don't step on the right toes, or the wrong toes, I guess. That you can, for the most part, do as you please. And I think that a lot of my desire for wealth or power is to reach that level where I would be able to minimize the input of those in authority into my life. Or I think there are those who are in authority who obviously know a lot more than you, so you can take their input into your assessment. But I think that what I mean is like undesired input. Anyway, that's the next project, doing the Airbnb out of my parents' house that they bought in 2003, because now we are transitioning out to the farmhouse. It's a small house in town. Currently, there's not a lot of supply for houses that are Airbnbs in town. There's one other Airbnb in town. Probably the risk profile for seeing one Airbnb in town
and using that as your gauge for what the demand of the market would be unadvisable. However, it's interesting. In life, you really just need to double down on the knowledge and opportunities that you have, or quadruple down. Not necessarily that you can't improve the areas where you lack, which is, exactly kind of what this is about. As I build myself in the man that I want to be, what areas do I lack in and what areas can I progress in? But at the same time, if there's something that you're good at, I think the world that we are moving into, less and less values being a quote jack of all trades, and specialization is the name of the game. And so anyway, I happen to have the knowledge of what the market demand actually is for short-term rentals due to the fact that I work at the hotel. And it's, in all honesty, unfair. An unfair advantage. The fact that I'm doing the books, I have the exact revenue numbers for every month. I know the exact booking rate and the fill rate of the hotel every month. I know when the high seasons are, when the low seasons are, what the events in town are that are going to lead to an increased demand. And I have a frame of reference of what a person could or should charge and what prices the market demand will be able to support. And so I know that if I can get this Airbnb up, that it'll be a really good deal for myself and my family. The question is actually doing it. And there's a little bit of hesitation in your mind as well, like how much money should a person actually put in to get the Airbnb set up? And I think that for this specific market, a person probably wants to be more premium than the other Airbnb, the long-term construction housing, and the hotel here. Be more premium than that just to stand out in that market. And I think honestly the rate of return is much higher on a more quote luxury stay, and a person doesn't even have to go that far out of their way to make their place nice to be a quote luxury stay in this market, this area. But I don't think that to get started that I have to be a luxury rental. I think that the market demand is enough. If it's not, really nice, it'll be just fine. But there's that in my mind, like, I don't want to do just good enough for now. I want to do all the renovations, but I think it's more important to get cash flow going, because the reality is I have quite a bit of debt, and it's not like there's actually that much money that I have to make renovations and improvements at this moment. Because I have around debt on my camper, plus debt on margin for stocks, personal loan debt, ends up being, thankfully no credit card debt, around 12.5 grand. And so there's not, I have money in my account to make whatever improvements and whatnot, but I think it's wise to get the cash flow going. I do recognize the fact that there is something to be said of, quote, financial privilege. Like, I do realize that the networks, the opportunities, the individuals that I have access to makes making money significantly easier for me than many other people, and making like a significant amount of money. Obviously, it's not like my parents make six figures, but nevertheless, if I can't make it with the privileges and opportunities I've been given, I shouldn't make it. And I don't think that someone with less opportunities couldn't do it. I don't think that gives an excuse. I just think that it would be harder for people. You're going to have to work a lot harder. Is that Barbara Martin? Maybe? No. Okay, I'm going to go to the house and try to sort boxes, and at the moment we're trying to take everything from the upstairs and put it downstairs, just because the task of getting everything out of the house and doing the necessary renovations for the basement is so large. The thought is possibly could we just rent the upstairs for a while until we get everything done that we need to get done. And so the task becomes getting everything from upstairs to go downstairs. Part of it is a storage issue for all the stuff in the house, so this temporarily solves a storage issue. But another aspect is the the improvements. It's not like it needs renovating. We've been living in it. I think a lot of people wouldn't want to live in it, but I think our family is more than happy to. Anyway, but get the improvements done that I think the bottom portion of the house would be acceptable on Airbnb, and it wouldn't have ratings that would negatively impact the bookings of the house. So I'm gonna go move boxes. Just about to get started eating some breakfast here. This is what the room looks like at the moment. And most of the stuff from underneath the bed has been cleared now. Just need to get this, everything out of the drawers and shelves, everything out of the closet. Mom and Dad's room has already been cleared for the most part. Michael's stuff is already out of here. And then I honestly have no idea what I'm going to do as far as the blah 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 interior design aspect portion of the house. I don't really like the idea of interior design. I don't really want to do anything. Or I'm not much for design, fluff type, decorational. I'm not much for decorational type stuff. But I think there's a certain amount that will financially impact the Airbnb. And so the question is, what does a person do? How much? Et cetera, et cetera. Like, this is a question. Is a couch like this? I think this is more than great, right? But does someone walk into an Airbnb, see a couch like that with the covers, and underneath it's that color? And does that impact the review they leave? I suppose it depends on the price point you set it at. But I would like to set it at a higher price point. I'm thinking if a person, because I know of the supply is high enough that I think a person could get $110 to $130 a night. But, you know, to be able to charge that price, there needs to be a certain standard of, like, for example, I think that most people, they see this, they're not going to be a fan of these floors. I'm not going to be a fan of this in here. Actually, this might not be so bad if there was just a better, what do you call, little thing that goes over that, you know? Like if that was touched up with, I don't know, like it had it was framed better, maybe a person could get away with not replacing this floor. And then this doesn't have a shower, so the idea is to implement a shower here. And then obviously the walls need to have plastic, put down a hard plastic mold to kind of, it's like a ready set shower that you just kind of stick on the walls, the molding. Anyway, that's on the docket. I was just looking outside actually at all the stuff that could be done as far as the driveway goes and just thinking. And I think that's the problem. Thinking, talking instead of doing. So I'm gonna have some breakfast. It's now 2:20. I've spent some time inside talking with Mom and Dad. I'm gonna take a nap. And then I'm hoping to go and clean the outside of the RV due to the fact that when taking off the vinyl graphics, there was residue left. I'm hoping to, I mean, if I was just using it for personal use, ideally I'd like it completely blank, clean of anything, but I think that I'm going to go out and get some vinyl graphics for advertisement purposes, advertise an Instagram account that I need to make for the RV, advertise the website possibly if I end up making it, possibly the listing on Outdoorsy or RV Share. I think it'd probably be better just to link directly to either a Linktree or a Bitly link, or just link to the social medias directly and they can link to that. So we'll see.